Good morning, fellow babies. A great day in store for you here in the metro area.
But the senator, while insisting he was not intoxicated, could not explain his nudity.
For hundreds of years, people from all walks of life have reported sightings of a large hairy animal walking on 2 feet. The scientific community has dismissed these sightings as hoaxes, hallucinations, or misidentified bears. But is there another option? Is it possible that there is an ape, the largest of the great apes, unrecognized and unclassified by modern science, roaming the forest of North America? Please join us as we seek the answer to this compelling question. You have arrived at the intersection of myth and science, of fact and folklore. You have arrived at Bigfoot Crossing.
Hey, fellow babies, welcome to Bigfoot Crossing, the intersection of myth and science, of fact and folklore. I'm Michael Willey. I am your guide on this ongoing expedition. This episode of Bigfoot Crossing is brought to you by TrueFreedomAtLast.com. When you're ready for financial freedom, visit TrueFreedomAtLast.com, because financial freedom and time freedom are true freedom. TrueFreedomAtLast.com. Now, in our previous episode, we started a game called Name That Critter. The purpose of... Wait. Some of you didn't listen to our last episode? Well, we're going to recap what we learned so you can still take the quiz today. But I know you want to be fully informed on the important issues facing our country today, so you can listen to missed episodes by going to www.anchor.fm/Bigfoot-crossing. You can also go to the Bigfoot Crossing YouTube channel at bit.ly/Bigfoot-crossing. That's bit.ly/Bigfoot-crossing. Bigfoot Crossing is also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Now, there are links to both the Anchor site and the Bigfoot Crossing YouTube channel on our website, www.bigfootcrossing.net. And while you're there, be sure to visit the Bigfoot Crossing web store.
Shameless plug.
Anyway, the purpose of our game is to try to classify Bigfoot, to try to figure out just what kind of a critter Bigfoot is. And as a reminder, those classifications are 1. Legend, 2. Hoax, 3. Hallucination, 4. Misidentified bears, and 5. A real, honest-to-goodness, living, breathing creature. So let's recap what we've learned. First, we learned that Bigfoot is not just a myth or a legend because there are so many reported sightings. People don't generally see a myth or a legend. 2, we learned that while there have been Sasquatch hoaxes in the past, and undoubtedly they will continue, not all Bigfoot sightings can be attributed to hoaxes. 3, we have learned that while it is possible that some Bigfoot sightings are the result of what I unscientifically called hallucinations, but is really pareidolia, it is impossible for all sightings to be the result of pareidolia, or your eyes playing tricks on you because of all of the other behavior and evidence associated with many sightings. And 4, similarly, we've learned that while some sightings maybe possibly could be the result of misidentifying a bear, too many sightings are reported by law enforcement officers and other trained observers, as well as experienced outdoorsmen, for all sightings to be the result of a misidentified bear. And so that leaves us with the final classification. Ding, 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 ding. A real, honest-to-goodness living creature. And this classification is probably the most difficult to navigate because it is fraught with entrenched opinions and debate. And as Tigger famously said in Pooh's Heffalump movie, you just can't argue with a word like fraught. But we are going to charge forward and attempt to navigate this potential minefield with good intentions to all and no desire to offend anyone. I just think everyone is entitled to my opinion. And if you disagree with me, that's okay. This is America. It is still a free country. I check every day. And you have the constitutional right to be wrong. And class is in session. Well, now that we have determined through the process of elimination that Bigfoot is a real, honest-to-goodness, living, breathing creature, we have to figure out just exactly what kind of critter Bigfoot is. Now, we won't know for sure just what kind of a critter Sasquatch is until one is captured or killed, but we can draw conclusions based upon the evidence that has been collected over the years. We can also draw some conclusions from traits and characteristics that have not been reported. And so that's what we're going to do here today. Now, there are 2 main categories that most folks fall into. The first is that Bigfoot is perhaps some sort of a subhuman creature, maybe a distant ancestor of man, or a relict Neanderthal. The second category is that Bigfoot is an ape, nothing more, nothing less. Now, if you have paid attention to the intro to this podcast, and if you haven't, why the heck not? I put a lot of work into that, people. Come on, man. Anyway, if you listen to the intro, you will see that I fall squarely into the Bigfoot is an ape category. Why is that, you ask? Because that's where the evidence points. Many scholars and scientists point to 6 traits that separate humans from the animals. And those are speech, fire, agriculture, writing, tools and tool usage, and large-scale cooperation. Let's look at each of those traits. Now, by speech, I don't mean just simple communication. I'm talking language. All animals communicate. Rattlesnakes shake their tails, dogs growl and bark, wolves howl, apes scream, howl, shriek, and whoop. But man is the only animal that speaks a language. And of all of the Sasquatch counters reported, in not a single one of them did a Sasquatch step out of the tree line and brightly say, "Good morning, and isn't it a lovely day?" Strike 1. The second trait is fire. Now, there is absolutely zero evidence that Bigfoot uses fire, but there is at least one report that indicates that Bigfoot doesn't need fire to keep warm. In his book, Sasquatch the Apes Among Us, John Green discusses an encounter in which a man using binoculars watches 2 Bigfoots sleeping out in the open in November 1968 in Oregon. The man watched for over an hour as the Bigfoot slept peacefully in the cold November weather without benefit of nor apparent need for a campfire. Now, we will discuss Neanderthals in a moment, but let me take this opportunity right here to state that archaeologists have proven that Neanderthals used fire. Strike 2. The third trait being agriculture, and really it goes without saying that Bigfoot are not farmers. Strike 3. The fourth trait is writing, and to my mind, that would include symbolic and artistic expression. Now again, there is zero evidence that Bigfoot engage in writing. There are no signs that say humans stay out, or even a symbolic representation of that thought or any other thought. Bigfoot deliver that message through bluff charges and rock throwing, which is typical great ape behavior. Now, some folks may say, but we see rocks stacked in the woods, and that could be a territorial marker placed there by a Bigfoot, or it could be a stack of rocks that some person stacked there. Strike 4. The fifth trait is tool usage. Now, the only reports of Bigfoot using tools is the use of a tree branch or other piece of wood as a weapon in hunting prey. Now, this is very similar to chimpanzee behavior and falls far short of the human standard of tool making and tool usage. Strike 5. Now, the sixth trait is large-scale cooperation. And by this, as I understand it, the focus is on cooperation between genetically unrelated strangers. Cooperation that extends beyond the typical bounds of familial ties. Now, the evidence seems to indicate that Bigfoot travel in family groups. And the evidence also seems to indicate that Bigfoot is territorial. And so those two traits of Bigfoot argue strongly against the idea of Bigfoot engaging in cooperation with other Bigfoot with whom they are not, to whom rather, or to which they are not related. In other words, no cooperation beyond the bounds of familial ties. Strike 6. Bigfoot simply fail this six-pronged test of humanity. Now let's look at what we know about Neanderthals. And the following information on Neanderthals comes from two articles from the website for the Natural History Museum in Great Britain. And links to these articles are found on bigfootcrossing.net under the episode info link. While you're there on the website too, be sure to check out the Bigfoot Crossing web store.
Shameless plug.
Anyway, archaeologists tell us that Neanderthals went extinct about 40,000 years ago. However, some Bigfoot researchers believe that rather than going extinct, Neanderthals simply disappeared into the woods and became the Bigfoot or the Sasquatch that we are now hunting for in the forests of North America. Now, there are several reasons why that is just simply not possible. Neanderthals were not the ancient ancestor of modern humans, nor were they a subhuman race or some sort of hair-covered intermediary between apes and humans, like some sort of ape man you might see in a movie. Neanderthals were human beings. They were a modern species of human beings, just a separate species. Homo neanderthalensis is the Latin. Neanderthals coexisted with Homo sapiens and interbred with Homo sapiens. In fact, according to one of the articles on the Natural History Museum website, most folks outside of Africa carry about 2% of Neanderthal DNA. Neanderthals were highly intelligent, proficient at making tools such as spears and flint hand axes, and they used fire. They engaged in symbolic expression through making jewelry, and some archaeologists attribute some cave paintings to Neanderthals. And their complex social life required the ability to communicate. It required a language. In short, Neanderthals were everything that the evidence tells us that Bigfoot are not. However, perhaps the most compelling evidence for the fact that Neanderthals are not Bigfoot comes from our first episode, where we based upon eyewitness reports, we estimated that the height of a Bigfoot ranges from 6 to 11 feet tall, and the weight we estimated from 300 to 1,200 pounds. Archaeologists tell us that adult Neanderthals ranged in height from 1.5 meters to 1.75 meters. Now, in English, that's about 4'11" to 5'9". And weight estimates range from 141 pounds to 181 pounds. A striking difference, to say the least.
Wow.
Neanderthals were short and stocky with short lower arms and lower legs. Compare that mental image to the image of a tall, bulky Bigfoot with arms that reach to its knees. Now you might say, well, Neanderthals just evolved into bigger creatures. No, that's not right either, because the longer Neanderthals were on the earth, the shorter they got. The tallest height estimates were from the oldest fossils, so they got shorter as time went on. Clearly, Bigfoot are not relict Neanderthals. Why do some folks insist on humanizing this unclassified animal? Well, John Green provides us with a couple of possible answers in his book, Sasquatch: The Apes Among Us. On page 459, he states, a Sasquatch walks in much the same way as a man, and therefore has considerable physical resemblance to him. He is also like a man and unlike other primates in its omnivorous diet, its ability to swim, and its successful survival in areas that differ widely in climate and vegetation. That practically completes the list of resemblances. Mr. Green continues on page 460, many people seem to have a need to believe that man in the wilds without civilization is purer, better, happier than they. Since studies of primitive societies have provided no consistent support for such a belief, the Sasquatch is asked to fill the role. It has to be out there, avoiding contact with its unsavory cousins, living in harmony with its environment because it has looked us over and found us wanting. Not because of its lack of weapons and inability to act in groups having rendered it unable to compete for more desirable territories, leaving for it only the mountainsides and swamps where man does not choose to live. It is a beautiful thought, but only a thought. It exists only in the mind. John Green, Sasquatch: The Apes Among Us. Now that book is available for purchase at HancockHouse.com. And thanks so much to Hancock House Publishers, the home of cryptozoology, for allowing me to quote from this wonderful book. Well, perhaps you're wondering, where is the evidence that Bigfoot is an ape? Well, it's everywhere you look. Let's start with the hair-covered body, a characteristic of every non-human primate. Next, we could point out the ape-like face with the flat nose, as opposed to the large protuberant nose that archaeologists tell us was characteristic of Neanderthals. The Sasquatch has a cone-shaped head, which is higher in the back and slopes toward the forehead. Gorillas' heads are similarly shaped. The sagittal crest is a ridge of bone that extends from the front to the back on the top of a primate skull, and is characteristic of male gorillas, and has been noted, though, in sightings of both male and female Sasquatches. As wildlife biologist John Bindernagel stated, anatomists remind us that the presence of a well-developed sagittal crest is actually a response to large chewing muscles, which require increased bone surface for their attachment. It may therefore be associated with large body size rather than maleness per se. This may explain the presence of a well-developed sagittal crest in at least two descriptions of large female Sasquatches. The first is the female filmed by Roger Patterson. The height of this animal has recently been calculated at just over 7 feet. Another such report is that of a Sasquatch observed near Banff, Alberta in 1969, which had both, quote, long droopy breasts, unquote, and a head that was, quote, sort of pointed. The two observers agreed that it stood at least 7 to 8 feet tall. That's a quote from page 170 of Dr. Bindernagel's wonderful book, North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. Unfortunately, I think that book is out of print. Copies can occasionally be found on Amazon.com. In addition to physical traits, eyewitness reports have included descriptions of Bigfoot behavior that is decidedly ape-like. Sasquatches have been known to crash loudly and violently through the woods with loud vocalizations and a tremendous odor, shaking and sometimes breaking trees. They have thrown rocks and other projectiles and have pounded on cars and camper trailers. And this type of behavior seems to accomplish its goal. The humans to whom this behavior is directed generally make a hasty retreat. That's why these behaviors are called intimidation displays. This behavior has direct parallels with the behavior of known great apes. Chimpanzees engage in intimidating behavior that includes crashing loudly through vegetation, shaking and swaying tree branches, and breaking off and throwing tree branches. Quote, Diane Fossey's description of her first encounters with wild gorillas is revealing. Sound preceded sight. Odor preceded sound in the form of an overwhelming, musky, barnyard, human-like scent. The air was suddenly rent by a high-pitched series of screams. And that's a quote from page 136 of Dr. Bender Nagel's wonderful book, North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. The gorilla's intimidation display also included chest beating and branch breaking. With orangutans, the waving and shaking and breaking and dropping of tree branches on interlopers is a common response to those interlopers and to other annoyances. Now, clearly, fellow babies, Bigfoot is an ape, albeit an unclassified one. Now, having demonstrated that Bigfoot is an ape, I suppose we need to stop right here and address another somewhat controversial issue, whether or not to kill a Bigfoot. It's a very simple dichotomy. Either one is in favor of killing a Bigfoot for scientific purposes, or one is not. And those of the no-kill school of thought believe that the evidence that's collected thus far and that will be collected in the future, footprint casts, photos, videos, certainly the Patterson-Gimlin film, hair samples, scat, eyewitness reports, all of that should be enough to convince mainstream science of the existence of Bigfoot. But the fact of the matter is that the evidence collected is not enough to convince science. Let's look at some of the weaknesses of this argument. How about footprint casts? Will footprint casts convince scientists? No. How come? Because footprint casts have been faked in the past and will be undoubtedly faked in the future. What about videos and photographs? Fellow babies, with modern video and photo editing software, it has never been easier to fake a Bigfoot photo or a video. How are scientists supposed to confirm that the creature in a photo or a video is real and not the creation of someone who's a whiz with the editing software? The fact of the matter is they can't. The Patterson-Gimlin film, and the Patterson-Gimlin film is a film, not a video, has been around since 1967, has never been successfully debunked, and science still does not accept it as evidence. In fact, it has been proven that it's impossible, biomechanically speaking, for the creature in that film to be a human being in a costume. And science still does not accept the Patterson-Gimlin film. Well, how about DNA extracted from hair and scat samples? Well, let's assume, for the purpose of argument, that a relatively fresh hair sample or scat sample is obtained, and we know it came from a Bigfoot. That the sample is not degraded by exposure to the elements and has not been contaminated by improper handling, so that a lab is able to extract a viable DNA sample. All that DNA test is going to tell us is that it came from an unknown primate. And friends and neighbors, fellow babies, we already knew that.
Why?
Why is that the result we will get? Because the DNA labs have nothing in their databases to compare to that sample. So it's unknown, because there's nothing in their database that matches it. And the only way to get a DNA sample into their database is to provide them with a specimen. And if science accepted anecdotal eyewitness reports, I would not have had to discuss pareidolia and misidentified bears in the last episode. Science demands a specimen because that is the only foolproof method of determining the existence of a species. And even when a specimen is provided, science doesn't always immediately accept it. For example, in the 18th century, when British scientists received the first platypus specimen from Australia, they carefully examined the specimen to see how a duckbill was attached to what they thought was a beaver body. They thought the specimen was a hoax. So don't expect science to immediately embrace the existence of Bigfoot as a result of giving them a specimen, but that is in fact the only way to convince science of the existence of Bigfoot or Sasquatch.
How?
So how do we do that? Well, ideally, we would find a Bigfoot carcass in the woods, a Bigfoot that has died of natural causes, and we find it fairly quickly after death before the natural processes of decay and decomposition have degraded the carcass. And that's very difficult.
Why?
Now, why is that? Well, like I said, as soon as a creature dies, decay and decomposition set in, and scavengers, everything from microbes in the soil to insects, birds, and other animals will find that carcass and start consuming it. And in less time than you think, all that will be left of that carcass will be bones, and those bones will be scattered by other scavengers. So it's very difficult to find a fully intact carcass in the wild. Let me give you an example of just how quickly Mother Nature cleans up after itself. Recently, I was taking my morning walk down the road I live on, and I came across a freshly killed armadillo. It was about 7 a.m., the blood was still fresh, so the armadillo couldn't have been dead more than an hour or two. Now, this was a Saturday morning. By the following Tuesday, all that was left of that armadillo was the armor plating. Now, I realize that Bigfoot is a lot bigger than an armadillo, but that size of that creature is going to attract even bigger scavengers. And so the principle remains the same. The carcass will be stripped clean, the bones will be scattered, or if there are porcupines in the area, the bones will be consumed. And that'll all happen a lot quicker than most folks realize.
Wow.
In fact, the lack of finding a carcass in the forest is an argument that skeptics often use. They say if Bigfoot exists, well, surely you would find a carcass. Now, due to the swiftness of the process we've just discussed, that is a bogus argument. I mean, there are forest rangers that go their whole career without finding the carcass of a predator such as a bear or a mountain lion that has died of natural causes. The lack of a Bigfoot carcass is proof of the efficiency of nature in cleaning up after itself, nothing more.
Amazing!
So, since our chances of finding a Bigfoot carcass, unless we are incredibly lucky, are slim and none and slim left town, the primary method of obtaining a specimen is to kill a Bigfoot, and that presents problems. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't have an ethical problem with hunting animals for food, because I grew up in a family where we all hunted or fished. We ate the fish that we caught. We ate the deer. We ate the squirrels that we shot. My problem is that we simply do not know how many Bigfoot are in North America. They may simply be a rare creature, or they may be an endangered species. We just do not know. So if someone kills a Bigfoot in the prime of its life, that one animal, think about this, is not the only one that's eliminated. All of the generations of offspring from that animal and offspring from its offspring are also eliminated, perhaps exacerbating the decline of a threatened species. If killing a specimen is our best option, ideally we would be selective about it and try to take an older Bigfoot. And before you ask, no, we don't have to ask for an ID. Anyway, like gorillas and other great apes, Bigfoot turn gray as they age. Silverback gorillas are not born with a silver stripe up their back. That color change comes as they age and eventually spreads. And since a specimen is the only way that mainstream science will acknowledge their existence and begin taking steps to protect the species, those in favor of killing a Bigfoot to provide science a specimen should try to seek out older animals. Now, there's one other method that I haven't really discussed, and that's capturing a Bigfoot, trapping a Bigfoot. There were efforts made in the 70s to trap a Bigfoot in southern Oregon in the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. An organization called the North American Wildlife Research Team obtained a permit from the U.S. Forest Service to build this trap in what was at the time a very remote location. The trap is a wooden box 10 by 10 feet made of 2 by 12 planks bound together with heavy metal straps and secured to the ground by telephone poles. So these folks weren't fooling around. They built a very substantial and secure trap, and they operated it for 6 years, from 1974 to 1980, and for 6 years baited it with animal carcasses and caught nothing but bears. The organization abandoned the trap in 1980. The door was bolted in the open position so that no one could get accidentally trapped in there, and they just left it to deteriorate. And in 2006, the U.S. Forest Service actually began to repair the trap as a sort of a novelty. There is now a road that runs nearby as a result of a dam being built, and the trap receives hundreds of visitors annually. So it went from being a Bigfoot trap to a tourist trap. Anyway, if you want to read about it, go on the internet and Google Bigfoot trap, and there is a Wikipedia article all about it, and including some pictures of it. But these folks were very serious about attempting to trap a Bigfoot and failed to do so. Trapping has its own problems, number one of which is, what are you going to do with him if you catch one? And how are you going to catch him? And this trap in Oregon was pretty ingenious, but you can't set one of those up just everywhere. So trapping is probably not a practical way of providing science with a specimen of a Bigfoot. But it's clear that science requires a specimen, and I am hopeful that when that specimen is provided, whoever does it does so in a responsible way. So we have concluded our game of Name That Critter by identifying Bigfoot as an ape and possibly an endangered species. And the only way that we will be able to get the government to engage in actively protecting the species is by providing modern science, mainstream science, with a specimen. All right, fellow babies, that's another episode in the can. Join us next time as we consider the many names that have been given to Sasquatch through the years. Be sure to join us right here at Bigfoot Crossing for a Bigfoot by any other name is still a smelly ape. This episode of Bigfoot Crossing is brought to you by TrueFreedomAtLast.com. When you're ready for financial freedom, visit TrueFreedomAtLast.com, because financial freedom and time freedom are true freedom. And a special thanks to Hancock House Publishers, the home of cryptozoology, for allowing us to quote from Sasquatch the Apes Among Us by John Green. This book is available again for purchase at HancockHouse.com and at the Bigfoot Crossing web store.
Shameless plug.
All right, there's the bell. Thanks so much for being with us here today at Bigfoot Crossing. Now get out of here.
We hope you have enjoyed your visit with us here at Bigfoot Crossing. The internet home for Bigfoot Crossing can be found at www.bigfootcrossing.net. Michael Willey's website, Bigfoot in Tennessee, can be found at www.tnbigfoot.net. Please follow us on Facebook at Bigfoot Tennessee. You can also follow Michael Willey on Twitter. His handle is at Michael B. Willey. Each episode of Bigfoot Crossing is posted to the Bigfoot Crossing YouTube channel. Please subscribe so you can be notified when new episodes are posted. Your feedback is always welcome. Please email questions and comments to tnsasquatch@gmail.com. Be sure to let us know which episode you have a question or comment about. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here at Bigfoot Crossing.
This is Brock Whitmore, live on the scene. Sir, did you see what happened?
Yeah, did.